Ron Johnson's been a lone voice in the wilderness inside of government for many years, and we are eternally grateful for all of the hearings and the things that he has done to bring awareness to the reality that is taking place today. It's very simple. This is a story that's been blown out of proportion. The misleading facts have been coming from mainstream press. The fact is this: vaccine injury is real. It happens. People are injured every single year. Children are maimed and killed every single year by our vaccine program. There are many that will say, well, it's rare. Does that mean we shouldn't talk about it? Do we talk about rare diseases? Do we try to cure rare diseases? Why is it in this one topic you are ridiculed, attacked, said that you're spreading misinformation for stating the obvious facts? My name's Del Bigtree. I am the CEO of MAHA Alliance, MAHA Worldwide, MAHA Action. But really, I'm just one representative of many, many incredible voices in a grassroots movement, a true grassroots movement for medical freedom that started many years ago and now has found real focus in this movement that we're now calling MAHA. I want to take just one moment to thank President Donald Trump, someone who is the first candidate that we ever saw dare to make the statement that vaccines cause autism, or that he thought that they did, that he wanted to do investigations into vaccines. And I'm not talking about this last election. I'm talking about the very first one. And every time he was asked in different scenarios, or whether it was on a debate stage, he said, I have seen children run across my office that were healthy, went and got a vaccination, and suddenly we're having issues spelling and reading, and we've heard the story over and over again. I'm one of those that has probably heard that story more than most, because I decided to do an investigation. I'm just like you, all of you in the room. I'm just a journalist, I'm just a reporter. No, I have no medical degree, but I did work for over 6 years on a medical talk show called The Doctors, where every single week I read medical journals to find stories of breaking news and science. And I learned to understand how to read that science, as Robert Kennedy Jr. has said the very same thing about being a lawyer. When I think, where is this movement coming from? What is it? I've seen all of the reporting. How far back do we go? Robert Kennedy Jr. began talking about this when he was first asked by parents that were coming up at his environmental hearings, where he was talking about mercury in the water, saying it's toxic, it's destroying health. And those mothers said, will you please look at the vaccines? There is mercury. The same thing you're fighting to get out of our water is being injected into our children. Of course, he was reticent because mainstream media and mainstream medicine scares everyone away from ever doing any investigation into that. But eventually a mother sat outside of his door with a stack of studies, and he couldn't ignore her, and he began reading. It's much like what happened to me. I was working on the Doctor's television show, and I was tipped off that there was a whistleblower inside the CDC named Dr. William Thompson, who was going to come forward and say that they were committing scientific fraud in the vaccine safety studies, specifically the MMR autism study. I made a documentary ultimately about that because, as many of you are aware, I pitched it to my executive producers. I know who you work for. I work for CBS. And they said, we're never going to go near that story. There is no way we are going to do a story that calls out the CDC and says that they're committing fraud of any kind, because we got to go and report on the latest flu epidemic, and they would let us behind the scenes, and we would make it into television, and we're not going to hurt that relationship. We're also not going to go after a product made by Merck, who's just one of the pharmaceutical companies that fund this show and fund most of television. As you well know, if you work in television, somewhere between 50 to 70% of advertising is coming from the pharmaceutical industry, which is why you're mandated to write the things that you write and told the things that you cannot write. So sometimes it takes courage to step out and do investigation beyond that. Let me show you very quickly where that investigation should start for all of you. These are vaccine inserts. I had my COO, Bridget Rasmussen, go by a doctor and say, we'd just like to see some vaccine inserts. Twinrix, I mean, I could read them off, Haverix, Shingrix. They didn't do infants, so we didn't get hepatitis B and those things. But I find it shocking, and you should find it shocking as a reporter, how many times I've read, well, the experts say, when Del Bigtree or Robert Kennedy Jr. says that there's been no placebo-based trials to establish safety prior to licensure, I would probably put money that none of you reporters have ever grabbed one of these and read it. Or if you did, then how did you write, the experts say, that that is misinformation? Because it's written in every single insert that shows up with every single vaccine that you've taken and that our children have been given. There's a very interesting conversation that happened during the hearings between Rand Paul and Senator Cassidy. Senator Cassidy brought up the importance of the hepatitis B vaccine, telling an anecdotal story about a young girl that he cared a lot about who was having liver failure. A tragic story, absolutely. But for Robert Kennedy Jr. and I and so many people in this room and thousands and thousands and thousands of parents, there is a story of a regression into autism, or of seizures, or of encephalitis, swelling of the brain in their babies after a vaccination, that apparently we're not supposed to care about that story. That Bobby Kennedy can't tell that story. That child doesn't matter. In the conversation, Rand Paul pointed out that hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted disease. The vaccine was developed for prostitutes and people that were having extreme sexual relations or heroin addicts. And he said, I think that a parent should have a right to decide whether they vaccinate their one-day-old baby, which is when this vaccine is delivered all across America. You should be able to opt out of a hepatitis B vaccine, since it is unlikely that in the near future for a day-one-old baby they will be having extreme sexual intercourse or sharing heroin needles. So what is the purpose? And of course, Senator Cassidy, I'm very glad that he had as many deep conversations as he did with Robert Kennedy Jr., but right before our eyes we saw what conversation can happen when reasonable people start talking about an issue that they've never been allowed to talk about before. Senator Cassidy, in front of television all across the world, had to state, you know what? You're making a good point. It is a sexually transmitted disease, but in mothers that are hepatitis B positive, that vaccine is going to save that infant. Senator Rand Paul pointed out, rightfully so, that every mother in America is tested prior to delivering a baby. We know whether they are hepatitis B positive or not. So why is every woman being forced to give their baby a hepatitis B vaccine when we already know their status? And right there, in front of the world, Senator Cassidy said, you know what? Okay, I don't think a mother should be forced to take it if she's hepatitis B negative. We just watched the first transformation of a medical doctor in an important conversation changing his mind based on the available science. That, was he unaware of it prior to that conversation? I don't know. Or had he forgotten about that? I don't know. But what we did see is a mind being changed. And so when people say, is Robert Kennedy Jr. going to take a vaccine away? I would say Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to begin a conversation of transparency, of talking about the actual science that is written in every one of these lists, pages and pages of injuries that are right here, written by the manufacturer by law because they are happening to real children and real people, and no one in front of me right now has ever written about this story. Why? How can you say you're doing your job? Who are you working for? We are supposed to be the fourth branch of government, the fourth estate. We are supposed to challenge these things and say, for how many years will we let these injuries happen before someone decides to make a better product or do a study and figure out, is there a test we can do to see if you're vulnerable to these injuries? We've never studied who these injuries are happening to. Sure, go ask the experts, just like Tony Fauci, who told you social distancing was science and questioning him was questioning science itself. Just like the vaccine stops transmission, which every single one of you wrote. I don't know how many of you have apologized for getting wrong. But on the high wire one day before anyone, the show that I do online, before anyone received a COVID vaccine, I read the emergency use authorization by the FDA. And it said very clearly, this study could not prove whether or not this vaccine can stop transmission. So what were you writing about? Where was your science, and exactly how do you call the people that got it right the spreaders of misinformation? You have been the spreaders of misinformation. You have gotten it wrong, and America is still waiting for an apology. Yes. Let me get back to hepatitis B. Not only is hepatitis B a sexually transmitted disease, or shared by heroin users, so there's no reason a day-one-old baby should have to get it. Let me show you, I got it blown up for myself so I could actually read it. You can go to FDA-approved vaccines, just Google it, and every single vaccine in our program pops up. This is how easy your investigation can begin, if you decide to be brave enough to do the investigation. And then click on whatever vaccine on the childhood schedule you're curious about, and then open up the vaccine insert. 6.1, every single time, this is how this works. At 6.1, the clinical trial experience is written down. This is what they are telling you they did to prove the safety of a vaccine. There's only one way to prove safety, by the way. You have to have a safety baseline. In high school, you should have learned about the double-blind placebo trial. You have to have one group getting the product and one group getting a placebo that doesn't affect the human body in any way. And then we have them both, we track them, usually for years when it comes to cancer drugs, and it doesn't matter if you're dying of cancer, we're not gonna let you trial that drug until we've proven it safe. Years we follow them. How long did we follow the hepatitis B vaccine trial group? It says right here, 6.1 clinical trials. In 3 clinical studies, 434 doses of Recombavax HB, you can look that one up. 5 micrograms were administered to 147 healthy infants and children up to 10 years of age, who were monitored for 5 days after each dose. Injection site reactions and systemic adverse reaction were reported 5 days. A 5-day safety trial with no placebo group. Look it up, it's there. Not misinformation, written by the drug manufacturer. I could do this with every single vaccine. Because of Donald Trump, we had a meeting at the NIH that I went to with Robert Kennedy Jr. when he was first president. And we said, why in all of these can we not find a single placebo trial of any of the childhood vaccines? Are you not doing placebo trials and establishing safety the way every other drug is established? Or are you just not publishing those trials? There was silence in the room, and finally Tony Fauci admitted, we don't do placebo trials on vaccines because it would be unethical. Unethical. For a vaccine like Gardasil, the first time they were going to try and deal with cancer, the vaccine, they had a belief that it was safe because they never did a proper placebo trial to test if it was. We just had an RSV vaccine just a couple of months ago, by the way, that finally had a saline placebo trial, and they stopped it because babies were getting sick, and it was clear that the vaccine was hurting children. Is that just because it was the first placebo-based trial we'd ever seen in a childhood vaccine? And let me say this unequivocally, if I ever see you write in your paper that the experts say a placebo trial was done, then you better print it in that article, and I've said that to all of you. And send it to me and Robert Kennedy Jr., because at the NIH, Tony Fauci and Francis Collins admitted we don't do them. So what does that mean? What does that mean for the safety of our babies and our children? A day-one-old baby is getting a product that we only cared to test for 5 days. Does a healthy child not deserve better than that? Because a cancer patient does. Our grandparents get products that are against placebo for years. Why are our babies not mattering? And by the way, America has the highest rate of first-day baby deaths in the industrialized world, reported by CBS. Is that caused by hepatitis B? I don't know. Is it caused by bad hospitals? Are we a third world nation? Do we not know how to treat a day-one-old baby? Robert Kennedy Jr. is about to start having investigations into these horrible stats. And for anyone that says there's no such thing as vaccine injury, that's curious, because written right here in 6.2, since you only did a 5-day safety trial, we are left with the post-marketing surveillance. I'd point out nervous system disorders for hepatitis B given to a day-one-old baby. Guillain-Barré syndrome, that's paralysis. And by the way, prior to a polio vaccine, that would have been called poliomyelitis. Paralysis still exists. It's still happening. Now it's a side effect of vaccination. Multiple sclerosis, exacerbation of multiple sclerosis, myelitis, including transverse myelitis, all paralytic diseases written here as being caused by a vaccination. Now you could say how many, but is that the only question? Do we actually live in a country where we're going to allow this to happen to anybody, especially a day-one-old baby? Let me continue. Seizures, febrile seizures, peripheral neuropathy, Bell's palsy, radiculopathy, herpes zoster, migraine, muscle weakness, hyperthesia, and encephalitis, brain swelling. Open up every one of these vaccines in the childhood schedule, and you will find encephalitis, a brain swelling event. Is it that shocking, really? Since the vaccine is designed to cause an inflammatory event to get your immune system to kick into gear. That's why they put neurotoxins like aluminum in the vaccine, so it will incite your immune system to swell your body. And if you're unfortunate enough that that swelling happens in your brain, now you're at risk of the symptoms and side effects of a brain swelling event, which, yes, can be autism. It can be Tourette's. It can be ADD, ADHD. This is science, folks. It's not misinformation. Now, is vaccines the only thing that could maybe contribute to autism, which, as has been pointed out, has gone from 1 in 20,000 to 1 in 36? It's more prevalent in boys, so we're talking now 1 in 22 to 1 in 18 boys. Why aren't you writing about this? Is this not an epidemic of disastrous proportions? Is it that hard to understand the science? Do you have to have a medical degree to say that a brain swelling event that is written in the side effects here couldn't possibly lead to a neurological disorder? Certainly you're all smarter than that. But you are the ones that have been gaslighting hundreds of thousands of parents that witnessed with their own eyes vaccine injury. You were the reason no doctor ever learns how to fix vaccine injury. We know how to handle a drug overdose because we can talk about that. And the doctors that do investigate how to possibly reverse transverse myelitis or Guillain-Barré syndrome the moment it's happening, a brain swelling event, you were ridiculing them. You were supporting a medical establishment that attacks that doctor for daring to say vaccines cause injury. You were a part of the greatest lie any modern society has ever told. How do you feel? Do you really believe? Is there something in you that has you saying vaccines, that he's wrong? Vaccines don't cause injury. You're only going to sit in two places. Either it's real, but it's rare, and I don't care about those babies. They don't matter. The greater good is all that matters. Or you're going to live in a completely blind place, which is it doesn't matter that's written on every single one of these things. I believe somehow the pharmaceutical industry has made a product that has no side effects. Good luck with that. The world just changed today. Now you'll have to decide whether you want to report on real science, because that is what you are about to see. Robert Kennedy Jr. doesn't need to eradicate any vaccine from the program. He just needs to show you how long the safety trial was. He just needs to make available to you and make sure that doctors give you true informed consent, that these are known side effects, that we haven't done proper trials to know how long they would be. Had we done placebo trials, we would have answers to those things. How often are these things happening? But remember, I just read 20 side effects of a list of about 60, and every single time, every injection, you are taking that risk of 60 different side effects for that one vaccine over and over and over again, 72 times. And counting and growing, we are rolling the dice. If transverse myelitis is rare, and encephalitis is rare, and multiple sclerosis is rare, and thrombocytopenia is rare, and myocarditis is rare, and pericarditis is rare, how long before all of those added together start moving out of the category of rare because they're all stacked on top of each other every time we do this? No one is trying to eradicate a vaccine program. What we're trying to do is say, we need to do studies. We have never looked at the entire vaccine program, ever. We've never, ever looked at those that got all 72 of their vaccines compared to those that got none. We asked the NIH to do that study, Robert Kennedy Jr. and I did, and a team of scientists. Why won't you do a retrospective study? If a prospective study, meaning having a placebo group and denying them of your faith-based religion that it is perfectly safe even before a trial, will you at least do a retrospective study of the vaccine safety data link, which has 10 million people in it, tens of thousands of unvaccinated individuals, which the Institute of Medicine said is perfectly capable of doing a full, well-powered study, comparative study between the unvaccinated and the vaccinated. Back in 2017, the NIH, Francis Collins and Tony Fauci said, we will never do that study. You're journalists. Your job, like mine, like a detective, is to come up with motive. What would be the motive for the largest, most powerful scientific institution in the world, filled with the greatest scientific minds, to not do the most obvious comparative study? Do you think they haven't done it? Do you think they want me at this microphone today? Do you think they want Robert Kennedy Jr. now the head of HHS because so many people now know the truth that you've never written about? Do you think they wanted to stop this? Do you think they don't realize if they'd have done a comparative study between the vaccinated individuals and the unvaccinated individuals and proved to the world that the vaccinated have less cancer, less ADD, ADHD, less lupus, less asthma, less autism? Don't you think you would have been printing that at the headline of every one of your newspapers? Don't you think they've run that study so that they could end this conversation forever? Come on. Where is your common sense? Where is your common duty as journalists to tell the world the truth? I'll answer questions in a moment. And that's just one issue. This movement expanded from being a health freedom movement, a movement fighting for informed consent and the right to decide what is injected into your children, the right to decide what is fed to your children. Callie Means and Casey Means brought the food health awareness movement together. At the moment, Robert Kennedy Jr. joined forces with President Trump. There were no buses paid by George Soros to fill people to support Robert Kennedy Jr. He had millions and millions and millions of people around the world and across this country that showed up in record numbers to vote, many of them outside of their party, for President Donald Trump. This movement is real. It's the real thing. Driven by moms that are tired of the media lying to them. And you have ruined all of your power because in your 24-hour-a-day news cycle, spreading lies about Robert Kennedy Jr., lies about the safety of all of these products, including the chemicals that are in our food that's finally being reported upon. Where were you in the 10 years that Kellogg's was poisoning our children in America, but not poisoning them in America because they're making a different product? Where were you? Who are you? Why did you start this job? Am I that different than you that I wanted to do an investigation? That my curiosity could not be stopped just because my executive producer said we're not going to look into that story? We don't cover that? Well, everyone that did has now changed the world. They just got their HHS secretary. They just got their president. And you're going to have to think about what you do from here. What I'm going to do as Robert Kennedy Jr. brings the MAHA movement and idea into the regulatory agencies, as he starts doing the studies and science that we've been asking for decades, as he stops gaslighting people saying, we can't figure out what's causing autism. We're the greatest scientists in the world and the greatest nation in the world, but we can't figure out a problem that's gone from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 34. Either someone's lying or someone needs to be fired. And that's about to start today. We're going to get answers to this, I guarantee you. We are the home of Microsoft. We've always been the home of Apple. We're the home of AI and computer learning. I guarantee you that vaccine safety data link database is perfectly capable of being looked at by computer programs and starting to do cross-references. That is what we do. That is science. How has that not happened up until this moment? Why is it going to finally take Robert Kennedy Jr. to do that? Well, that's going to happen, and that's all we want. Radical transparency. And all I want from the news is radical truth. If you're being asked to be shills and pump out lies, quit. Start a podcast. Do something helpful for this country. MAHA is a movement. Today we'll be just launching a brand new website with almost nothing on it called maha.io. My job as Director of Communications for Robert Kennedy Jr. is now over, as of just over an hour ago when I was standing in the Oval Office watching him sworn in. It's been an epic journey. 2.5 years on that campaign, a decade of being ridiculed, he and I, and multiple decades of many of the parents that sit in this room. For all of those injured children, your day has come. The truth is now here. The sun is now shining, and the bright light of radical transparency is about to begin healing America. We're going to do everything we can to support this grassroots movement of so many brilliant thought leaders and truth tellers that have made this moment happen. Our goal is to create tools to help people learn to eat better. Right now, we just had a meeting just hours ago of doctors and scientists to put together a real food pyramid that isn't poisoning people and putting Fruit Loops and Captain Crunch above a steak. We're going to come up with a real food plan, and then we're going to look to change the school lunch program. Maybe Bobby will beat us to it inside of government, but if he doesn't, we're in a race against time. We're here to heal our children. Why are our children not eating whole food every single day? You've heard the stats over and over and over again. We're the sickest nation in the world. $4.5 trillion, 90% of which is chronic disease. Up, by the way, 60% this country suffering chronic illness. That was 12% in the 1980s when I was a kid. That is the greatest decline in recorded history of public health. And you were writing and not talking about it. So continue to not talk about it and let the podcasters and the truth tellers grow. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris didn't win, and her promise to censor all of those truth tellers didn't come true. Maybe privately you were praying they would win so that you could dominate and work for the same companies you have, hiding at least half of this story. We're going to build tools. We're going to build an ecosystem for true proactive health, working with every single practitioner that makes lifestyle change your first choice over prescribing you a drug. No one is here to take out the pharmaceutical industry or the giant industrial medical complex that is pushing drugs on our children starting in elementary school. 1 in 4 kids leaving elementary school will be on a drug the rest of their lives. I didn't grow up like that. There's no reason we should be like that, except that we let the pharmaceutical industry buy your news agencies. We let them buy up the hospitals. We let them buy up the government, the most powerful lobby in Washington. But today, they lose. And today, the people win. We're going to go with every single person that is on this planet to make people healthier. If you need a drug intervention, then maybe it took too long. We're going to get to the young people. But if you are going through drug interventions, you should be eating better. We're going to help with that. A national database of all the practitioners that are going to heal you. Real health care, not sick care. We're going to create media to support everything that Robert Kennedy Jr. is doing, because you'll probably be mandated to scream bloody murder every time a transparent study comes out. But we'll be counteracting that with the truth tellers that got us to this place. I hate to be so emphatic, but we've been ridiculed and lambasted by every one of you over and over and over again, while our children got sicker and sicker and sicker, and more of them died. 38,000 reported deaths for the COVID vaccine alone, and none of you are asking a question. How do they explain that? Wouldn't we pull any other product in the world? No, in America, we say let's give it to the children now. Let's put it on the schedule for children who have a 0.0002% risk of death from COVID. These are shocking stats that I've never seen you report on. We'll see if you start reporting now that we have a truth teller inside of government. And we'll see if you start reporting as you watch this movement in the hands of the people, the MAHA movement, growing every single day. They're going to look for who's telling them the truth. They've seen who's lied to them. Maybe they can forgive you. I will if you start doing your job. Thank you.